What is happening, everybody, and welcome to another crossover here, Stochastic and DFS by the numbers, breaking down a UFC card. I think that's the best way that we could describe it. It's not nearly as strong as UFC 299, but it's better than no cards taking place. So we're going to break it down from a DFS perspective here. If you guys could do us a favor as you're watching this, like the video, subscribe to both our channels, both Stochastic and DFS by the numbers, and we're going to break down a card that, listen, if you are not betting on it or you're not playing DFS, then you're probably not interested in it. And all the cards are equally entertaining when you got money on the line. So, Brady, we're going to start by talking about the main event here. We got Tuivasa taking on Marcin Tybura. It is a very, very tightly lined heavyweight fight. Do you have a lean in either side for DFS?
Yeah, I guess I kind of do. My strong lean though is that I think this fight is going to be important at these price tags because I can make a case for both fighters. You're looking at Tai Tuivasa. This is a guy that has 8 wins, 7 of which come under 1.5 rounds. So when Tai Tuivasa is getting it done, he's getting it done very early. So he has that first round, finish bonus there. So I like Tai Tuivasa 8,300. And then, yeah, if Tybura is able to, implement the wrestling, get this fight down to the mat, we've seen Tybura taken down, and he's kind of a fish on the water, fish in the water on the mat. We saw Sergey Spivak take him down multiple times and sub him. We saw Alexander Volkov, I'm pretty sure, get his first UFC submission against him in his last fight as well. So the path for Tybura is certainly there. I guess for me, I am more so on the Tuivasa side. He's on a 3-fight skid. I think this is a good spot for him to get back on track. I think the UFC wants him to get back on track. This is a guy in Tai Tuivasa who's a fan favorite. People love the guy. People love the shoey gimmick, all that good stuff. And yeah, he has a ton of power. And what I noticed about Tybura, he's a guy that isn't really threatening on the feet, doesn't have a ton of power. So I don't feel like, Tai Tuivasa is going to have to worry about anything coming back to him. I feel like he can attack him early, attack the legs early, and potentially get him out there early as well. But yeah, the longer this fight goes, the better it does favor a guy like Tybura. He is the underdog. But for me, I'm more on the Tuivasa side myself. Not really sure what I'm doing with ownership as of yet, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to be pretty heavily exposed to this fight one way or another.
Yeah, and like you said, 3-fight losing streak for Tuivasa, but all fairly difficult opponents. Gets knocked out by Cyril Gane, but I know he only landed 29 significant strikes, but he knocked down Cyril Gane. He did have moments in that fight. The Pavlich fight, he did not have moments in because he just got basically run over and annihilated immediately. And then the fight against Volkov, another one where he kind of got run over. So it's a tightly lined fight. I think I'm going to end up more on the Tybura side, unless there's something totally outlandish that comes out with our ownership projections, where if one guy is way crazier popular than the other, I don't have strong enough conviction on one side of this main event to be like, this is the guy. But if the field is like, hey, I'm playing 50% of this guy and 25% of the other, then I would go for the lower owned fighter. The way I'm looking at it right now, very close fight. I think I lean a little bit more towards Tybura just because he has more paths to win. Whereas Tuivasa is very reliant on getting a finish in this fight, which certainly could materialize in the heavyweight division. But Tybura could potentially get a knockout. I don't know how many more wars Tuivasa could get into, how many more times he could get knocked down, how many more big shots he could take. So Tybura, I would favor Tuivasa on the feet, but I don't think Tybura is dead on the feet. Whereas if this fight goes to the ground, it's Tybura's to win all day. He's also cheaper. So I lean a little bit more towards him for DraftKings, but it's a fight where it's hard for me to really say one way or the other. So Tybura, cheaper on a slate where it could be a little bit hard to find upside in that lower dollar range. So I'm going to be a little bit heavier on Tybura for DFS purposes. As far as spend up options go, Brady, this is not a card with very many big favorites, and a lot of the big favorites are sketchy. Even somebody like Kennedy and Sechiku, he's a minus 500 favorite, but this is not somebody who's particularly trustworthy. Are there any high-priced favorites that you do like targeting for this card?
Yeah, I think there's a couple like solid plays. Like I think Kennedy's fine at 9,400. I think he runs through OSP. I even think Mike Davis is solid. Mearshart solid. I'm gonna give somebody that's not as expensive as I really think he should be, honestly, and it's Shafel Filio. He's 8,700, and I just think this fight as a whole has a ton of upside. This is probably one of my favorite fights on the entire card. Both of these guys are killer be killed fighters. We have Filio with like over a 90% finish rate. Ode Osborne finishes the majority of his wins in the first round. And, I just trust Filio a lot more in this matchup. Ode Osborne's a guy that is a great hammer, but just like the worst nail ever. Ode Osborne, I think, has 5 or 6 finish losses. a couple submission losses mixed in there, a couple knockout losses mixed in there. And Jafel Filio, I just feel like is going to have just a significant grappling advantage here. And I also feel like if this fight reaches the second round, it heavily, heavily favors Jafel Filio. So he's not that expensive. There's, plenty of fighters priced above him here. And I think he brings a ton of upside, whether it's an early finish, could be a late finish as well. But I think he has some grappling upside in there. And I think he goes out there and gives Ode Osborne another finish loss.
Yeah, I think that he's a very strong option as well, particularly because if Filio wins, it's likely going to be from wrestling, from grappling, potentially a finish, which always does score well. So he's somebody who I like quite a bit as well. I'm going to look at Isaac Dolgarian, though, somebody who you and I were talking about a little bit before the show started, where this is my favorite fight on the entire card. I think that just matchup based, this is the most talented two fighters that we have on the slate. And Dolgarian, I don't know for sure what he's going to be in the future, but I think he is massive, massive upside, and he has a very, very friendly fantasy game for DraftKings scoring purposes. He's landing 3.13 takedowns per 15 minutes. He is also landing 7.29 significant strikes per minute. So this is somebody who's very young in his career, only 6 professional fights, 6-0, and so far every time we've seen him fight in the UFC or outside of it, he's gotten better with each progressive fight. His last matchup against Francis Marshall, I know in hindsight we could look at and be like, oh, Francis Marshall, maybe a little bit of a fraud, not all that talented. But at this time, maybe like a year ago, Francis Marshall was considered a pretty high upside prospect. So Dolgarian, I think he has potential to be somebody who's a top ranked fighter. And then in a fight against Christian Rodriguez, who is a very solid fighter, but he is somebody who can be taken down. Like we saw in the fight against Paulo Rosas Jr. I know that Rosas wasn't able to maintain his cardio, ended up gassing out, but he did take down Rodriguez 3 times in the first round of that fight. Then he just kind of got tired and didn't have anything left to go to. So if Dolgarian's able to implement his game, not only do I think he wins, I think he scores really well for DraftKings in that mid 8K price range. So nobody that I want to be super heavy on in like 94, 9,500 range. But for sure, if we're looking like that upper mid-range, kind of the same way you said you thought Filio could potentially be a little bit more expensive, that's how I feel about Dolgarian as well. What are you looking at in the mid-range, though?
Yeah, so there is a fight that I don't think it's the most the most exciting fight to target, but I feel like it's an important fight to target, and it's going to be the Josiane Nunes Chelsea Chandler fight. And yeah, I mean, I think this fight's going to score well one way or another. In terms of who I think I win, I'm kind of leaning Josiane Nunes. It's just on the feet. I think she's going to have just a significant advantage. She is going to be undersized in this matchup, but she's been undersized in every single matchup she's ever had. She's 5'2", and I even think she might even be lying about her height because I think she's more so like 4'11" in there. But yeah, she's going against Chelsea Chandler, who in theory, I guess Chelsea Chandler does have a path in terms of maybe taking her down. But yeah, I'm not sure she's going to be able to. And if not, on the feet, I think it's pretty much one-way traffic. Chelsea Chandler is just a walking punching bag. She's very hittable. And Nunes, for what it's worth, she hits very, very hard. The majority of her wins do come by knockout. So yeah, I don't know if this fight's going to be that popular. I don't think it is. But I think Josiane Nunes does have some solid upside here and a potential knockout win as well.
To your point about her height, I remember for DraftKings purposes, I was on her against Zara Farn. And honestly, the biggest problem that Nunes had in that fight, she could barely reach the chin of Farron in that fight. And it was a massive, massive issue for her. But to your point, Chelsea Chandler is just such a punching bag on the feet that Nunes is either going to be able to land the big shots and potentially finish Chelsea Chandler unless she runs away and the cage doors unlocked. She's able to make her escape, which she wasn't able to do in the fight. Well, let's see, how long ago did that take place against Norma Dumont? July of last year. So if this fight plays out on the feet, I do think that Nunes is live to land a big shot and hurt and finish Chelsea Chandler. But if she doesn't, I could see Chandler having a lot of wrestling and grappling success. So I agree with you. I think it's a fight that could potentially score well for DraftKings purposes. And something else as well, which is going to come into play with the fight I'm about to talk about. We typically do see women's MMA fights carry less ownership than a lot of the men's fights. And that's why in the mid-range, I'm looking at Jacqueline Amorim taking on Corey McKenna, where Amorim is very questionable cardio. We saw in her UFC debut, she had, 3-4 minutes of cardio and just totally death gassed in that fight. And then she did look better in her follow-up fight against Montserrat Ruiz, but that's not really telling us all that much because she doesn't belong in the UFC at all. So the way I see this fight going is that if Amorim is able to get in top position in the first round, I think she probably ends up submitting McKenna. But if this fight gets extended, I just don't trust the cardio of Amarine. And I could see McKenna taking over in the second and third round just by implementing a wrestling grappling pace, provided that she actually comes into the fight with a decent game plan, which has been very questionable for McKenna in the past. Like the fight against Elise Reed, she lands 3 takedowns, but just didn't keep her foot on the gas and didn't continue to wrestle and grapple. Anybody could beat Elise Reed if they just come out with a wrestling heavy game plan. So I'm hoping that Amarine potentially tires early and McKenna takes over late, or Amarine's able to get that first round submission. I think those are the 2 most likely outcomes for how the fight goes. Has a little bit of upside for DFS, and I do not expect the field to be very heavy on this spot. So finally, let's wrap it up with this, Brady. Which punt plays are you looking at? Any value options that you're looking to get into your lineups?
Yeah, I think it's between 2 for me that I actually don't mind. The one I'm going to go with is going to be a fight that I think is going really under the radar. Like, I feel like this fight could potentially be fight of the night, and it's Josh Kulabal, Danny Silva. You got Danny Silva 7,400. This guy is just a complete madman. He walks forward like a zombie the entire time and just throws a ton of volume. In his Contender Series fight, he went out there and landed, I think, over 200 significant strikes. And it's different. It's a lot different between its opponent, Kulabal, right? Because Kulabal doesn't really throw much volume at all. I think all the volume is going to be in favor of Danny Silva here. Of course, Josh Kulabal does have power, and that's a concern here. But I think, Danny Silva is going to be marching forward the entire time, landing a ton of volume. And on top of that, we've seen Kulabal like slow down, honestly, in like every single fight. Like he's dropping third rounds all the time. He dropped a third round to Charles Jourdain, dropped a third round to Sungwoo Choi, dropped a third round to Lerone Murphy. Just drops third rounds pretty much in every single fight. Whereas Danny Silva, he's not going to really slow down. He's going to come forward the entire time. He's going to be there the entire time. So if this fight either does go the distance or does get extended, I think Danny Silva is going to put up a lot of strikes here, potential late finish for him as well. As long as his durability holds up, because he will get hit. He will get hit hard. Kulabal does have power, but yeah, I like Danny Silva here, 7,400. I think he has some solid value here in a fight where I think could be potential fight of the night with these 2.
Yeah, I don't agree with the betting line at all, just because Danny Silva is clearly the minute winner in this matchup. You mentioned all the pace he puts out, the amount of volume on the feet. That was why when you were talking, I highlighted that he lands 13.6 significant strikes per minute. Now, it's a small sample size. We only have one fight, but we've never seen anything like that out of Kulabal, who only lands 2.68 significant strikes per minute. So you have to think that when we're just looking at who's going to win the minutes, it's going to be Danny Silva just based on the output. So if this fight goes to decision, I expect him to win and score really well. And I really think the only way for Kulabal to win this fight would probably have to be by knockout, because I don't see him winning a decision if it gets there, considering the difference in output. So I agree with you. Danny Silva is my overall favorite value option on the slate, but I do have another fighter I wanted to bring up here because I thought there was a chance you bring up Danny Silva just because the numbers really strongly, heavily indicate that he's a really high fantasy potential scorer in a win. But I'm going to look at Ange Loosa here just because he's somebody who is able to wrestle. And we've seen that as the Achilles heel for Brian Battle in his fights. Only a 45% takedown defense on paper. Loosa lands 2.25 takedowns per 15 minutes. If he looks to wrestle in this spot, we just haven't seen a lot of evidence that Brian Battle could consistently defend takedowns. And there's also a lot of output on the Loosa side. He lands 6.32 significant strikes per minute. If it takes place on the feet, Battle's super dangerous. He's very live to end up knocking out Ange Loosa. But if Loosa comes in and he looks to wrestle like we've seen in some of his other fights, he could put up a really, really big DraftKings score. You look at his last fight against Reese McKee, and I know McKee is not the most dangerous fighter in the world, but he's certainly game. He fights until the final bell. He does put up a lot of output when the fight's on the feet. So we saw Loosa land 98 significant strikes and 6 takedowns in that spot. I wouldn't be surprised if we see similar kind of output for him in this spot against Brian Battle. Is that somebody that you've thought about at all, or do you think Battle will be able to defend the takedowns?
No, I'm actually right there with you on Loosa, especially if he comes in there with a good game plan, which I do think he will. I was watching his last fight with Reese McKee, and I forget which commentator was talking about it, but he basically was saying that Ange Loosa is putting like a major emphasis on like the wrestling in his camps. So, I mean, the game plan's there, right? We've seen Battle taken down in a lot of his fights. So, yeah, I think Ange Loosa has a path, and the path will score well if he takes it.
So hopefully it keeps to a good game plan, and hopefully fighters like Corey McKenna keep to a good game plan, and then ultimately ends up happening like sometimes and not always. But I'm excited for this card from a DFS standpoint. It's not the best card on paper from like a watchability standpoint compared to UFC 299, but I think it's a great DFS card. Lots of high variance fights, lots of good GPP targets. And if you guys are looking for more information for myself or Brady, check out our YouTube channels. Stochastic on Friday, I'm going to be doing a breakdown of the slate using the Sims tools, and I'll be going through all of our projected ownerships, my fighter exposures, and then Brady puts out massive amounts of content for DFS, for betting, for prize picks. So check out DFS by the numbers for all of Brady's content this week, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Good luck this week. We'll see you back here next week.
See you.